I'm visiting here today with Alfredo Diconstanzo. He is a Beef Systems Nebraska Extension educator. So, Alfredo, thank you for joining us here today. And how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Danielle. How are you?
Good. Well, we have seen, and I know the heat is not over with, and we're in for a few weeks of heat as we continue through July. So I'm sure this just kind of raises some concern for livestock and especially feedlot cattle. So I guess kind of right off the top of your head, any tips to helping those cattle stay cool?
Yes, and I think what's critical about this is the components or the elements that make heat stress challenging is, of course, we're feeding cattle, high-energy diets. So feedlot cattle are more prone to this issue than, say, cows, right? That's number one. And then the next part is that particularly this week, there really isn't that much wind to talk about, and wind is one of our best helpers around the time of heat and humidity. So, if we take a look at all the elements that compose heat stress, other than the high intakes we expect on our cattle, it'll be temperature, humidity, solar radiation, and wind. And each of them obviously contributes. If they're all, if they're getting worse, and that means temperature's high, humidity's high, wind is down, and radiation, or there is no shade, no cloudy skies, then we got the worst possible scenario, and I think that's what we're in for in the next 2 weeks. So when we wake up in the morning, look at our weather forecast in the next 10 days, and it looks like this, then we have to be doing a few things out there. And happy to chat with you today about what might be the easiest or the best strategies to start utilizing out there.
Absolutely. And I guess, are there any specific management practices that, improve comforts? I know shade goes a long way, bedding, sometimes people use sprinklers. So, I guess, right. Any thoughts there?
Yep. The challenging thing, especially we're into it, is now we're looking at what we can do with what we have, right? If there is no sprinklers in the facilities, then it's going to be difficult to install them, right? Unless you have a smaller yard, which I've done, just a nice setup with garden sprinklers, which works very nicely. But even as we speak about, for those folks that do have sprinklers, wind is really important to have when we have sprinklers. Like in a dead spot for wind with sprinklers may actually make it worse. In those scenarios, I would almost prefer that people would look at bedding, being able to throw out anywhere from 4 to, initially probably 10 pounds of bedding on the highest possible, the windiest possible spot in the feedlot, even if we do have sprinklers, just to help scatter those cattle, because on top of all the things we're talking about, flies are a problem in the summer, and it makes cattle bunch up and remain pretty active, trying to shake away the flies and everything. So it's really important to sort of look at what you have to work with. If there is no shade, if there is no sprinklers, I think bedding will help to, number one, provide an area where cattle can go lay down and not have to be exposed to the tremendous heat on the ground. The ground is easily some 30 to 40 degrees warmer than what the air temperature is sometimes, because it absorbs so much heat. So to me, in a situation, and I'm really now talking about an emergency situation, somebody has no shades, somebody has no sprinklers, maybe it's time to consider something more drastic, such as bedding. So then we come to places that do have shade and or sprinklers. So shade, to me, is a really go-to place for most places anymore today, because it keeps cattle up, 4 to 5 degrees cooler than the critical temperature or the outside temperature. So shade would be the next thing to be sure that we have. And then lastly, of course, sprinklers, which, as I've said before, we also need the wind to help the water evaporate off the hide of those cattle to create that cooling effect. Having said all of that, I think at night, especially if we have a fair amount of concrete and, as we go into South Dakota, maybe northwest Iowa, southwest Minnesota, there may be a little bit more areas with surface concrete, whether it would be a wider apron, et cetera. There's nothing wrong with opening the water tanks and letting the water run out, particularly at the end of the day, so those cattle can maybe even lay down on the cool of that water. And then again, I'm talking about an emergency situation where that water will run over a concreted surface and hopefully let those cattle lay down on that overnight and cool down. So to me, some of those are critical things that we should be considering as we face this next heat wave.
Absolutely. Yeah, some good tips there. And I guess the other thing I maybe thought about just pointing out is that, not everybody has the same, resources and whatever
Correct.
when it comes to managing heat. But, so if implementing it, that might just be a big investment. But ultimately, it'll probably pay off in the future.
Certainly. The reductions in intake are drastic with the heat. We're already facing that. We've been facing that for at least over a week, even in spite of some of these remedies. And that sets cattle back on growth, of course. But the worst thing is obviously death. These cattle are so valuable. When we're back to the bedding issue, and really I recommend bedding on dirt surfaces for anybody that even if they have shade, because you can scatter them a little bit. We never have the right amount of shade, right? Because they're expensive to build and difficult to maintain. So there's nothing wrong with scattering cattle with the use of bedding, particularly away from the sprinklers, if we do have sprinklers, so they're not all kind of scattered, crowded together under the sprinkler, and they are able to rotate in and out of there. And, sometimes I hear things such as, well, I don't like to put bedding because it's hard to get it out. Well, I'm looking at it and saying, well, pulling a dead animal out, as valuable as they are today, is way more expensive than pulling any sort of bedding out of the facility, And, in a sense, we're into a time of maybe that the rains, hopefully, that have come to our area are maybe slowing down a little bit. And we can certainly use bedding and make it last because there won't be precipitation landing on it. So it's not like we're going to put bedding in and get it out tomorrow just because it had a lot of rain on it, So, and most people know how to set up a bed pack with and without precipitation, so they're able to manage something like that over time to permit these cattle to remain cool.
Absolutely. All right. Well, anything I missed or anything else to add? That's kind of all I got for you. So.
Yeah, no, I think the most important thing, which we haven't really talked about, and that is, for me, the easiest or the most efficient way to cool an animal is to provide them with water, right? Ample water supply. And I think we need to talk a little bit about that because water access becomes an issue. Most of our wells and facilities run water at 10 gallons a minute or more, which is great. We need somewhere between 10 and 20 gallons a minute flow rates at our water tanks. The question is, do we have enough space for these animals to sort of share the spot, obviously, because, once space becomes a premium, then they may fight. Some of them might stand in front of the water tank and not let others in. So even though you think you might have enough water, I say that we need to have at least somewhere in the range of 1% of the pens of 100 head pen. To make it simple, that would be 10 heads should be able to drink comfortably at the water tank. If that's not the capacity you have, then you need to consider putting a tank there. If we're at an emergency situation, plugging the bunk or dropping, say a pipe, half-cut pipe or a half-cut culvert lengthwise could probably help, line that bunk to be able for us to drop water inside the bunk and then let those cattle have access to extra water. They're not eating that much anyway, particularly in an emergency situation. So why not use the bunk to allow them to have more water for the amount of time that it is necessary.
Absolutely. Yeah, water is definitely very important for sure. So
exactly.
It's good to go there or anything else? So
I think that would be great. Of course,
okay.
The nutritionists will likely work with each operator to manage intake. So many of them have special rations for the heat, and we'll let those individuals work with each of their producers to manage that. I think that's a prerogative of each nutritionist and their clients. But if that's the recommendation by their nutritionist, then they should follow whatever the recommendations are to ensure that these cattle are presented with the right energy and the right forage fiber so that they can manage heat.